Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. It's nice to be here today. I will, truth in advertising, I am experiencing what I would call ragged love today. And what I mean by that is last night, actually, I was at the wedding of my godson. And it was, so lovely. I have known him since the first day he was born, which was about 30 years ago. And, he's just such a remarkable young man. And as weddings go, there's all the things that happen. And the group of us that have known each other since before these children were born, we were all together and celebrating it. And we noticed at dinner, we were at the old folks' table. Because we were the old folks. And just watching, this group of young people as they're dancing and celebrating and, sharing their lives, and in, the decades that will pass, they will be at the old folks' table. And then, listening to the songs this morning just tickles me, because, these were the soundtrack of our youth. But it got me thinking two things. The first is, and what I would say is, these are lessons that nature teaches us. Because I think the most sacred text is the text of nature. If we want to understand the experience of the divine, there are plenty of scriptures from plenty of traditions which are good and important and beautiful. But really, nature is our greatest teacher to understand things. And watching this cycle as it was happening had me think of something that, is in the experience of something like this terrible tragedy that happened this past week of the earthquakes in Syria and Turkey. And then also in this wedding, which is like the opposite of that. But in both of them, I believe there is a truth that nature teaches us. And it is this, that in order to survive, we must be flexible. The earthquake, one of the things that comes out is that there were so many deaths because of so much corruption in the building, and that the buildings weren't able to move and flex. And those of us that were sitting at the old folks' table could be filled with bitterness and regret. But because we love each other and we practice flexibility and openness, curiosity, it was a celebration, it was a joy. And, we often hear in New Thought, lots of names for God. God is strength, is beauty, is goodness, is truth, and on and on and on and on. And I think all those are good, and they are good. But one I think we don't think about with God is this, is that God is curious. God is curious. And, I think that is an attribute of love. Because curiosity can express itself in one of two ways. It can be a desire for power. I want to know my opponent's weakness. Or, which is really the toxic mimic of its true meaning, which is to love someone is to be curious. And that our word of power in relationship is tell me more. Tell me more, because I want to know. I'm curious. How can we grow closer? So that's one truth that nature teaches us. And Something that we also understand as humans, because, there are many planes of being. There is the visible and the invisible planes, and we are in all of them. And the visible planes, the material plane, it's the world of objects. It's the world of ratios. It's the world of knowing. And then there's the subjective, the unseen planes, which are more about process and learning and feeling. One is about judgment, and not that judgment is bad, and one is about curiosity or growing and being open to what's unfolding. So one of my mantras, just kind of going into this, is from, I want to say Ted Lasso because that's where I heard it. But Ted Lasso was quoting Walt Whitman, who said, "Be curious, not judgmental." And I think that's that's like the mantra. That's written in every journal that I start. Be curious, not judgmental. Because, curiosity is open. It's expanding. It moves into the process of the unseen. Judgment is grasping and clinging and lives in the world of ratios. And again, it's finding the balance between the two of them, but as we move into life, I think it's incumbent upon us to remain curious, flexible, movement. I think it brings us greater joy. So that's one thing that we understand in the world of nature. And something as humans that I was just saying a moment ago before I got distracted by myself is that in the world of process, what we begin to understand about ourselves is something that Neville Goddard says, where he says, the world is as you are. The world is as you are. In fact, quietly to yourself, just affirm that. The world is as I am. Even Emma Curtis Hopkins, the Winchester Mystery House of New Thought, says something very similar when she says, the world in which we live is an exact record of our thoughts. Now, I think what can happen is we can get confused and think that, the world is as I am, therefore I create my own reality. Well, actually what we create is our own perception of reality. And because we understand from a metaphysical, but even from a quantum perspective, that thoughts are causative, that what we are creating in mind, what we are creating in the unseen, begins to manifest itself in the seen planes of being. And so, thinking is not a victimless activity because it ripples out. I would offer for our consideration that we don't really have many thoughts that are even our own because they have grown out of influences of other people or other circumstances or other things. Because everything is interconnected with everything else. Everything is participating, and so my perception is causing me to act and respond in a specific way, which is causing those in my web of being to respond and act at a certain way, and we create and we create. In the imagination of the Upanishads and Vedanta, there's this beautiful image of Indra's many-jeweled net. And it is said that the cosmos that we live in is this great net that is cast by Indra. And at every cross of the net, where they meet there is a precious jewel. And that this precious jewel reflects every other precious jewel in the entire net. And we are those precious jewels. We are the jewels of Indra's net, how everything is interconnected to everything else. And, I love coming up here and hanging out with you guys and just being with you guys in this experience that you guys are going through in the next evolution. And so, the word from the old folks table is be curious, not judgmental. Stay flexible, because cool things and interesting things are about to happen. I affirm often that I am a point of contact between these different planes of existence. Ernest Holmes, the founder of our particular denomination, would say that I am a center of divine consciousness within the vast whole. That is really the truest thing about me, that I am a center of divine consciousness within the vast whole. And I want to talk about how we can kind of maybe move there, maybe offer a trick or two to get there. And this time of year, we just celebrated last week Candlemas, which is one of the points of power in the great cosmic calendar. And in some mythologies, it is said that this is the time of year that Persephone lights her candle and begins to move from the underworld into the spring or into the time of light. But it's really all about this idea of light. And again, nature teaches us these things, right? There's the seen and the unseen, there's the darkness and the light, and both of them are so important. But we are moving into this experience, but what we are reminded of as of being centers of consciousness is that we are centers of light. And this is something that great teachers and avatars have said from time immemorial. And something that Abraham Heschel, who was this great public theologian and Jewish mystic, Kabbalist, he would say that there aren't many proofs for God. That really, we can't prove that God exists, nor can we prove that God doesn't exist. And it's a boring kind of waste of time, in my mind, of speaking from the old folks' table, to go into that it's hard to prove the existence of God. But, he says, there are witnesses. We can't prove it, but there are witnesses. Witnesses that trigger this experience of love. Witnesses that open us up to think different things. Witnesses that show up in these incredible downloads of these incredible scriptures and the legends and the mythologies and the teachers and the avatars that are there. And one of mine happens to be this first century radical healer, teacher, character, revolutionary, truly in many ways, in his ragtag followers in first century Palestine. And there were witnesses, and they wrote about their experiences. And there's this line in the Gospel according to St. Matthew that I love the translation of Eugene Peterson. He was a poet more than a theologian or a scriptural writer, or whatever those kind of guys are called. But he says this, and I just love this. He says, you are here to be a light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now that I've put you there on the hilltop, on a light stand, shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. And so I think this is both an individual challenge, but it's also a challenge of who we are in relationship to each other. Because there's no really such thing as an individual. We are made up of communities. Our very body is a community of all these processes that are in there. Each one of us is who we are because of the relationships that we are in. And here we find ourselves on a Sunday morning in a spiritual community because there is something within our soul that is looking for this experience. And what do we do? In the very mission statement, there is this affirmation of creating a world that works for all. I don't say everybody, because that's too limiting. To me, it's all. Trees, birds, bees, my dogs, all. A world that works for all, which is an interesting way to sort of organize our lives. Because in many ways, it's the greatest challenge of the day. So we are, and I heard many conversations this morning, we are in probably one of the peak national holidays, the Super Bowl, which says it all. And it has all the religious connotations. There's proper dress. There's special foods. There are things to say and do that unite us and create this whole imagery of it, is it not? And I poke fun of it, and, am I going to a Super Bowl party? You bet I am. Do I know anything about football? Not a thing. I know I'm a big guy, but when I was in high school, I wasn't that guy. And growing up in Southern California, I never really followed sports. And football, I found out last night who's actually playing. But I know what I'm going to eat. But it sits with this line that I read from this author who I really like. Her name is Vandana Shiva. She's an ecofeminist and an author and all-around interesting person. And she says this: we have moved from wisdom to knowledge, and now we're moving from knowledge to information. And that information is so partial that we are creating incomplete human beings. We are moving from wisdom to knowledge to information. And it's stilting our growth. And I would add that we are moving from wisdom to knowledge to information to entertainment. We want to be titillated, distracted. We want to be, we watch, or some people watch television where between the ads for whatever medication, there is infotainment about what we should be enraged about and what the other team is doing that is so horrible that we should be filled with anger and dread and righteousness. And we're entertained. And when we're entertained, it goes to the classic myth, the uber myth that all the myths are based on, whether it's Star Wars or the Book of Exodus or the Wizard of Oz, which is that when we become distracted, we fall into a kind of trance. And when we fall into this trance, we forget who we are. And when we forget who we are, we enter into bondage. My particular religious scripture that I read is Lord of the Rings, and in there, evil is enslavement. And whether it's Exodus, when they forget who they are and they become the slaves, or whether it's the Wizard of Oz, or whatever the case is I'm saying, it's that sense of when we forget, when we are no longer curious, when we numb ourselves, then we begin to lose that aspect of our humanity that echoes in our soul that we are centers of divine consciousness within the vast whole. And we become nothing more than a commodity. And so, what I want to offer is this, is that the truest thing about you, the thing to remember, the truest thing about you is that you are the beloved of the divine. The truest thing about you is that you are loved unrelentingly by a divine presence that is curious as to how your life unfolds and invites us and lures us always into a greater experience of who we are through the power of love. And so I was talking about this to a friend of mine, and he said he sent me a text or an email or whatever he sent me, whatever I read, and it was like, well, theologically, why do we say that God is love? What does that even mean? God is love. It sounds right. It sounds good. And so Thomas Ord, in his book God Can't, says this. He says that, and what is love? Love is purposeful action in relation to God and others that aims to do good. Love advances well-being. It fosters flourishing, abundant life, and blessedness. To put it formally, to love is to act intentionally in response to God and others, and to promote overall well-being. No proofs, but witnesses. And nature teaches us that. Right? Because the very experience of nature is giving of itself, to itself, through itself, for itself, as itself. It is this great experience. In Greek, the early Christian mystics used the word called kenosis, which is this pouring forth of the divine presence of love into all creation, the giving of itself in all creation. And then creation in turn giving of itself. And so that experience of creating this world that works for all can only be accomplished through the power of love. It cannot, if history has taught us anything, technology, politics, religion, science, they ain't going to save us. Not one of them. Not one of them has, not one of them will. The only thing that makes all things new, that restores and heals and reconciles and creates, is the power of love. So maybe you heard, like I used to hear, that you really can't love another person until you love yourself, which I think is just another way to shame us, right? Because here's the good news and the bad news. You can't love yourself until you've been loved. Nothing comes from nothing. It must come from something. And so if we have not felt love, it's hard for us to love. Which, by the way, makes things like the Seal Beach Center for Spiritual Living or Namaste Center for Spiritual Living a really good idea, because it means we can come to a place and experience being loved. When I teach practitioner training, one of the things that I always say is, or not always say, I say it enough, is can you pray for someone you don't love? And spoiler alert, no. Because in our spiritual mind treatment, we're treating our minds, and how can we be the presence of the divine and hold a causative thought for another person that we're holding resentment for. So the first thing that we must do is move into a place of love, because love is what heals and restores. We love each other into wholeness. And so some place like this is a place where we can be loved into wholeness. And what I want to offer is this. Actually, what I want to offer is a process to do this. I'm encouraging my community to do this. In fact, they are doing this probably even as we speak, because our services in Fallbrook start at 10:30. And as they're getting ready to meditation right around this time, they're going to be doing this process that I'm going to invite you guys to do with me in this process. And lucky us, we're all going to be doing it together. How cool is that? So this is how the process works. And if you're game, just let yourself feel comfortable. If you want to close your eyes, that's good. If you don't want to close your eyes, just soften them. But it starts with this, is think of someone that you love. And by the way, they don't even have to be human. I'm a student of mythology and history and religion and all those things. And I mean, if you look at my house, it's like a Hare Krishna temple with all the temples and pictures of this and that icon and that. But the most sacred icon I have is a photograph of my dogs. Particularly at this moment, these days, Rollo. When I think of Rollo, when I look at an image of him, when I create an imagination of Rollo, even though he may want to use my slippers for something other than walking in, perhaps a snack, or perhaps the backyard needs to be landscaped differently, or whatever else he may be doing, beside and behind all of that, there is this deep, overwhelming love. And so imagine, if you would, a person or an animal that you truly love. And just let that feeling enter into your heart, so that your heart is unfettered, unbound, and grows with a breath that expands literally in our body. That feeling of love. Moving from the heart into our whole being. And feel that. And then quietly to yourself, repeat these words. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be happy. And now look at that individual, that being that you love, and again say these words. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be happy. And now, take that feeling that's inside you and expand it into this room. Expand it that love that you are holding in your heart is filling this entire room. And maybe your intuition is telling you to zero in on somebody in this room, to hold this prayer. And say again quietly to yourself, may we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease. May we be happy. Alan Chadwick, who is an anthroposophical gardener, says this: there is one rule in the garden that is above all others. You must give to nature more than you take. Obey it, and the earth will provide you in glorious abundance. There is one rule in spiritual community that nature teaches us. We must give more than we take. And if we obey it, our community will provide us with glorious abundance. Thank you for your kind attention.